Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organisers. It's been a fantastic meeting. It feels kind of like I'm skipping school, and so origami is my hobby, and my day job is as a computational biologist. And I guess earlier today we heard someone say about biologists and classifying things, and as Rutherford said, all science was either physics or stamp collecting. I think was actually aimed at biologists mainly. But to be honest, I think scientific stamp collecting is extremely important. It's given us, Mendeleev and the periodic table of the elements. Chemistry, that's a pretty easy classification, of course, but as we move on to biology, there are no chemists in the room. As we move on to biology, and we have sort of the classification of all life on the planet, the binomial taxonomic names of species and so on. So we have these sort of different layers of classification and how life is put together. And so my interest is really at the molecular level, and can we come up with classifications of molecules, proteins, DNA, RNA. And so I've spent really the last 25 years of my life trying to do that through various biological data resources that are online. And so, yeah, my sort of personal scientific goal has crystallized to be to completely and accurately classify all proteins. This has turned out to be rather more difficult than I was expecting. It's taking a bit longer. So here we have an example on the right of a complex of some different proteins. And so proteins are a string of amino acids, so it's a polymer, and it folds up. It's not really origami because it's sort of more like a 2D string, rather a one sort of D string, rather than a two-dimensional sheet of paper. And sort of interestingly, we've heard a lot of talk about generative AI, and generative AI has absolutely transformed my entire world. So this isn't actually a protein structure that we've experimentally determined. This is a computational model by a method called AlphaFold, which was released a couple of years ago. And so this, in my field, it's like switching the lights on rather than fumbling around in the dark. So whereas I thought it was going to be that there was no chance of having this complete and accurate classification, I think actually within the next 5 to 10 years we'll essentially have this complete. So these are very exciting times. However, I'm going to be talking about a different kind of folding in the main today, so origami. So maybe putting this in the context of the things that we've heard. So if we have monumental sculpture, this is a sort of a subtractive art. You knock off bits of stone to make your final piece of artwork. And we've heard about various painting, which I guess is an additive kind of art. You're adding things onto your canvas, whereas origami is neither of those things. It's a transformative art. So you have your square of paper, nothing is added, nothing is taken away. And so there are sort of a whole bunch of interesting constraints that origami brings, and that brings a nice challenge, makes it an interesting thing to do. And actually, those constraints have got harsher over time. If you looked at origami from Japan 100 years ago, then you would have many cuts, things made not from squares, multiple pieces were quite normal. Okay, so there are many origami styles. So you'll be very familiar with, paper-folded animals, cranes, mockingbirds, these sorts of things. For the mathematicians, we have modular origami, where you can make all sorts of geometric patterns from actually very simple units of paper, which are then connected together. And then the style of origami that I've become interested in and worked on for a long time is this on the right, which we call origami tessellations. And there we have simple units, but they're all embedded within a single sheet of paper. And so how can we put those together in interesting ways? And so this is an origami tessellation made from tracing paper, so when you hold it up to the light, you sort of see the patterns of light and shade through the different numbers of layers of paper. So, I mean, I want to talk quite a lot about simplicity, not complexity, but I have to start with the complexity of origami. And so, in 1987, the great paper folder Robert Lang, who I'll mention several times today, he came up with the Black Forest cuckoo clock. This is quite a magnum opus, I think, of origami, and it really showed the height of sophistication at that point. One sheet, no cuts. Actually, it's a rectangle that's 10 by 1, so by modern standards, it's a bit dodgy, but anyways, 216 steps, you can get the instructions, you can have a go at folding this. It's going to take you quite a while. Actually, it's more impressive than it looks, because I think if you pull the pendulum, the cuckoo will pop out.
No. That's the
So,
clockwork.
Sadly not. So yeah. But actually, nowadays, this looks rather quaint by modern standards, I have to say. So let's move on to more recent folds. So Satoshi Kamiya is a Japanese paper folder who I think represents really the pinnacle of the current art. And so here are a couple of his models. So on the left, we have WASP 2.6, I think is the number of this model. And you can see it's got the wings separated. It has claws at the end of each of its long, thin legs, various sort of barbs and notches, the abdomen very well formed. So it's a really, elegant, beautiful model, but extremely complex. And then also we have on the right this Ryujin, kind of dragon, and it's sort of long and thin, and amazingly, this is actually folded from a square of paper. It seems somewhat unbelievable. If you want to prove it to yourself, you can go onto YouTube and find time-lapse pictures of someone actually making this thing. I think they estimated it took them about 60 hours over 30 days.
Excuse me, is that from one single sheet of paper?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I heard you correctly, but I just...
Yeah. Although, to be honest, the person online who does this, they fold it, they make it from 2 sheets which they have to tape together because they can't get a piece of paper big enough of the right sort. But essentially, it's one sheet.
Without cut.
No cuts. Yeah, it's phenomenal. However, it's not really for me. I mean, this is not. I sort of, in my younger days, I ventured down this complex route. But at a certain point, I realized that, yes, you can make anything from origami. It does not mean that you should make it, however. So anyway, so this is the lingua franca now of these models. You can't really draw out the step-by-step instructions for these very complex models. They're just too complicated. It would take maybe thousands of steps. So what we have now is models where you just get a crease pattern and then it's kind of go work it out.
You're done.
Yeah, so there's kind of communities of people who share video instructions of like, I think this is how you do this bit and this bit. So yeah, things have really changed. So would anyone like to forward any suggestions about what we have a crease pattern for here?
Dragonfly.
Yeah, it's good. Good. It is an arthropod. So
The lobster.
who said lobster? Very impressive. Okay, yeah, this is indeed a lobster, and I'm not sure I have a laser pointer here anymore. I could sort of have a go at, you can't see that at all, can you?
Use the stick.
Yes.
You can see it, okay,
Yes.
but the stick is much more fun.
Stick's nice.
Okay, so here we have the lobster, here we have the abdomen, we have the sort of the antennae here, this is the head here, legs are popping out in these parts here. There's this funny structure here, we'll see what that is in just a moment. So here is the folded model. It's really quite phenomenal. And in fact, what they've done with this model is they've incorporated an origami tessellation to get the sort of fine structure of the shell. And you see these funny blue, this sort of frill that the lobsters have. So that was that strange sort of zigzag structure at the bottom. And in fact, because it's from the edge of the paper, they've made a color change on it as well to just add a little extra detail. So there's a whole group of these nutcases who called the origami arthropod makers, and there's a lot of stuff like this there. Blows your mind. And yeah, it's one square, no cuts.
So when you get good at this, can you spot what the shape is going to be from the crease pattern?
You can get some idea of what the base might be like, but you can't, that just tells you what the orientation of the flaps are. It doesn't tell you what the model will be.
Sorry.
So, you know, mammals, they tend to look kind of the same with sort of 4 long legs ahead. That kind of. So this is more, so here we have the great Robert Lang's interpretation of a mountain goat ibex here. It's rather beautiful and detailed. This is my rather simpler interpretation of this. And actually, so, you know, when I make something, I want it to be of the material to be obvious. I guess I like things to be true. So if I make something from wood or metal, I want it to look like it's made from wood, metal, or paper. And so, yeah, so I like these sort of 22.5-degree legs. It looks like origami to me, a flapping bird or something. And when I first exhibited this at the British Origami Society Convention, that great sort of melting pot of art, actually, overnight at the display table, someone in a fit of artistic criticism took my goat and refolded it with accurate legs and cloven hooves. This is not the done thing. And we never found out who that was. Okay. So inspiration comes in many forms. And again, going back to the British Origami Society conventions, late in the evening, folding in the bar. So inspiration can come. And so we fold all sorts of different things. We teach each other new models. We try and invent models. And this one particular year, in the bar, rather late, trying to get free drinks out of the barman, we decided that we would create a pint of beer model. And so impressively complex 3-dimensional pints of beer sort of started to emerge. And I tried this and sort of after some while was making no progress at all. And then there was a sort of a moment of inspiration, the head of a pint of beer. And suddenly, almost fully formed, popped into my head a rather simple model. If I took a sheet of paper, white on one side, black on the other, almost folded it in half, added 2 more creases, and then just a further 2 creases, and I would get to this rather elegant and simple pint of beer model. And this got me some free beer, so it was really a good invention. Now, it's sort of, it still remains to this day, some 20 years later, completely surprising that no one else on the planet appears to have invented this model independently. It seems so simple and so obvious after that moment of inspiration. And so, yeah, this idea that you can, people often think that because something is simple, it must be very easy to create. And I think that's something that you often see in modern art and walking around galleries. Oh, I could have done that. But yeah, this is not the case. So moving on, a different area of simplicity. So here on the left, we have an amazing DNA model by the great Danish folder Toki Yen. And being a molecular biologist, I loved this model and I tried to sort of promote this. But the problem was that no one could really fold it unless they were already a paper folder. And so I sort of endeavored on trying to simplify this model and came up with a much simpler version. Here we have a cover image from Nucleic Acid Research that used this for their cover one year. And actually, it took really the longest time to go from this model to something that was simple enough that anyone could fold. And in addition to that, the way we sort of did it was remove a bunch of folds, make these templates that you could print out and you know, cut out, and some very simple instructions online. In fact, the video has been viewed something like 1.5 million times now, and so we see around the world people using this model for teaching, you know, molecular biology. So it's a really nice thing that only came around by that sort of simplicity. There's also a whole bunch of people who have independently suddenly discovered that, you know, and their own DNA origami, which looks remarkably like this DNA origami. It's sort of interesting and comes to sort of issues of attribution and copyright, which we were talking about yesterday. But anyway, it's great that this has become so popular. So we tried to scale this up, getting back to the topic of this meeting, and so we thought we would see if we could make a really big one of these. So we got some a roll of poster paper and tried to make something about 30 meters long for a public engagement event. And we're doing this here at the Sanger Institute. This is around the time of the Human Genome Project, and these were all the machines they were using for sequencing it. So it was just the perfect place to be trying to make this. What we discovered was that there were some issues of supercoiling that we hadn't anticipated. And actually, it was incredibly difficult to, just in this 30-meter long thing, to try and work out these supercoils and get this thing folded up. A bit of a nightmare. It turns out that the cell also has this kind of problem. So it has 3 billion base pairs of DNA. And so how does it do it? Well, basically, it uses a pair of scissors and some sticky tape in the form of an enzyme called topoisomerase. And this can help sort out problems with under and overcoiling, relieving tension. Actually, DNA in the cell is mainly underwound, which opens the DNA out so proteins can come in and bind and help genes to be transcribed. So, it's pretty amazing that, you know, the cell can pack 2 meters of DNA into every tiny little cell. But I didn't really appreciate it till I tried to pack a 30-meter paper DNA model into the back of a Land Rover. And then you really understand how difficult it is to pack DNA. Yeah, very hard. So, so if we're looking at the very smallest scales and folding, so proteins and DNA has its own kind of folding. In fact, people have been using DNA for synthetic sort of nanotechnology by designing DNA sequences, making those, and then you can make structures with those, which is pretty interesting. So you can design these pieces of DNA that will then anneal in double strands, which form these rigid kind of rods, and you can, make structures in quite a predictable kind of way. So you can use this for sort of molecular printing or making shapes. This is some very early work in the field, to more sophisticated work where you can start to do all sorts of things like making Penrose tiles and other sort of interesting shapes and tilings. So we've got folding at a very smallest scale there. And this brings us on to a segment to talk a bit more about origami tessellations and their design. So here are some more examples of some origami tessellations, and maybe I'll talk about some of these. And so it's a geometric style of origami. It's been developed probably from the late 1960s in a sort of a basic form. And it's created by a series of thin pleats where you have a sort of 2 folds in parallel that fold across each other. And then you have these sort of more complex twist folds that sort of where the pleats join together. And here we can see they don't have to just be sort of flat things. You can really breathe life into these tessellations. And these are masks by a really great paper folder called Joel Cooper, who uses the tessellations for creating these details, like the hair is this hexagonal weave here and these things here, and then sort of pushes out these pleats to make these 3-dimensional faces. Okay, so here's the basic unit. So here we have 4 pleats, which all connect together into this central twist fold, and when you fold it up, this is the pattern you get. So we have, the sort of 1 layer of paper here, 2 layers of paper here, and 3 layers of paper here. And you can put these things together to make a tessellation like this. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the sort of direction this goes in. And so, you know, once you start doing that, you think, well, what tilings can I take any tiling and turn this into an origami tessellation? So here's an extremely early one of the first ones I ever did, where we've taken this 488 Archimedean tiling and turn this into an origami tessellation. So there's an algorithm which various people have sort of come up with. I kind of codified, was the first person to put this algorithm into code. And basically what you do is you take your tiling, you define some centers of rotation in those tiles, and then you shrink each of those tiles. And I call these grey tiles here the adult tiles. And when you shrink them, they give rise to these little babies, which is like connecting an elastic band around each of these. You have a different name for this. We can talk about this.
Oh, it's the Minkowski sum of the original and the dual.
The Minkowski sum, yeah, okay, great. That's good. We've got some maths squeezed in there. And then to make the tessellation, we also twist these adult tiles, and then this becomes one of these foldable twist units. I use a couple of parameters in my work, so I define this thing alpha, which is the angle between the adult and the baby polygons, and a pleat ratio, which is the ratio of the sides of these two things. So then, well, the tilings are kind of your world to explore. So here we go for 4444, basic checkerboard pattern. And so we can vary these 2 parameters and get all sorts of different tessellation patterns. I've just got one here where I've shown what that looks like folded up. And then you explore 666, triangle tessellations. It turns out actually these 2 things give you identical tilings. As we just heard from Alan, then these crease patterns are a combination of the tiling and its dual. And so these are a pair of dual tilings. And so here's what this one looks like. We don't have to have one uniform or Archimedean tilings. We can go to K uniform of any flavor that we want. And so here's the sort of the next one that I've looked at. Here's a coloring I'm using with, these are the adult. So this, if you put these together, this forms the tiling you see here, and the yellow tiles here are the baby polygons, which is the dual of the tiling. And so here we see that one folded up. So what tilings work? So it turns out that you can do all the Archimedean K uniform tilings, no problem. The centers of rotation must define an orthogonal dual tiling, and all the edge lengths must be positive for this to happen. So there's really a ton of tilings. There's enough to keep me busy for the rest of my life. Must all the polygons twist the same way for this to work? We can show no, they do not, but there are some very strong constraints on what will work here. And so here we see some checkerboard, the 44444 pattern, where we're twisting the alternate squares in opposite directions by the same amount. And so here we see 2 different tilings, and the baby polygons now become stretched out. So they're not squares anymore, they're these rectangles. And in this case, they're really stretched out. What's really fun, and this was a real surprise, is when you fold these up, they look like this. Sorry, the one on the left is not very clear, but the one on the right, you get this amazing illusion that these are folded pleats, that are woven in and out from each other, which was a real surprise. And it turns out if you do the same thing with the 3636 tiling, then you can get this kind of woven strip pattern. Which is quite remarkable. And the illusion is really quite strong when you see them. And then after some more years of trying to work out how to do this, I never could quite work out how to do this algorithmically, so this was done essentially by hand. We can get this octagonal weaving, which is a pattern that you see on wicker chairs and these sorts of things. So that's where I got stuck. My maths wasn't good enough to really sort of generalize that any further, but Robert Lang stepped in and, oh, no, sorry, there was one more slide before that. So for the octagonal weave, so this is the biggest example of that I ever made. I'm never making it ever again, ever. Okay, so something about these origami tessellations is that I print out the crease pattern. I make all the creases, and you have to make them going in the right direction. So you fold all the ones on one side, you turn it over, you fold all the ones going the other way. And then it's essentially you collapse it in one go, which is quite a feat. You have to sort of just keep pressing around and fix things when they're trying to bend the wrong way and just go round and go round. And it takes potentially hours and hours to do this. With these ones, the weave ones, for some reason, they have this property that they want to close up into sort of, they get curvature as you're trying to fold them up. And so the more repeats you have, the more folded up it goes. And this one just gets beyond wanting to be in a ball, and you're just like wrestling like crazy with this thing. So yeah, basically you think they might be able to tile the plane. Actually, you can't. You just can't do that with some of them. There's no kind of stepwise foldable sequence for these things. So then, yeah, back to Robert Lang. So he was able to completely generalize this and make all sorts of crazy stuff. So here's a very nice heptagonal weaving pattern. And also this is just now a random version of that. So yeah, hats off to Robert. So then we've heard quite a bit about self-similarity and fractalness and so on. So we can also do these sort of rotationally symmetric tilings. And here we have me sort of attempting to coerce this to fold flat. So sort of working from the outside, working into the middle, and then squishing it as best I can in the middle. So these ones you can almost do stepwise. It's not quite, but they're much easier than these sort of rectilinear planar ones. Until you get to trying to do a 35-fold tessellation. So I call this the impossillation. And this, I think I was attempting to fold this over a period of about 2 months, spending an hour or two just trying to get the thing flat and failing. And eventually, it's not perfect, but yeah, never doing that one again. And also tried to make log spirals, and again, this was beyond my mathematical reckoning. So Robert Lang again stepped in and helped me just working out the maths of where the centers of rotation needed to be to get this tool work. And here's my best efforts at getting it to fold, and you can see that I just give up in the middle, right? So yeah, this is not possible to fold flat correctly. But there are far more adept paper folders than me, and so I think this one really shows what can be achieved if you're young, have immense amounts of time and no family. And yeah, this Romanesque by Brian Chan is quite a phenomenal example of this, yeah, sort of fractal kind of nature. So yeah, really beautiful spiral fold. So yeah, I've been sort of slowly working my way through Grunbaum and Shepard tilings and patterns and finding various things and seeing how the hell do I fold that? Is that foldable? Is that not foldable? One that I particularly liked is star tilings. And this one I really love because it's got nonagons in. If you like tilings, you know, folding something with nine gons, it's just kind of different. So yeah, this one, but you can only, you can't have, yeah, you must have convex polygons to do this. So obviously you can't use star tiles. So we have to modify this and chop the stars into these sorts of shapes here. And just to make things a bit more complicated, I turned every nonagon into isosceles triangles as well. So I did those chops. And then, so the next thing I'll show you is a tessellation based on this sort of slice of that. Here's the crease pattern. And then, so yeah, we can fold this up here. We see the hexagon in the middle, and then these rather, I think they're beautiful and elegant nonagons. If you like tilings, then this stuff just gets your juices going. Okay, and so I wrote some software for doing this. Yeah, this was written in Perl, so yeah, I guess you'll know what this is, because this audience isn't as young as the ones I normally talk to, who only touch Python these days. And so here we see some Kepler tilings, and so we can fiddle with the various parameters and try out lots of things. Okay, I have a few minutes left. Okay, so then in a nice collaboration with Robert Lang, so he took this idea and really took it to the max to understand what tilings are really possible. And so he, based on some very old work by James Clerk Maxwell, he, using the sort of force diagrams, noticed the sort of relationship between origami tessellations and these tilings and dual relationships were like force diagrams. And so he was able to come up with this proof that, yeah, all these origami tessellations were essentially spider webs. You could think of them, the tilings, as these filaments under tension, which would then have this orthogonal dual property. And so, yeah, in this example, Robert shows a typical looking two-dimensional spider web, and in green you can see the dual of that. And then he went on to show, well, here's the crease pattern for that spider web, and then the folded pattern too. So this was sort of a really interesting result, and really showed exactly what was possible with origami tessellations. It was some surprise that a few years later that this actually found an application in cosmology, which was pretty amazing. So Mark Nerink, who's at Durham University, and also, no pressure, but Marina Constantinou is sat at the back, one of the co-authors, so I have to be careful what I say here. It's both a curse and a blessing, because we have someone very knowledgeable, but it also means if you want to ask questions about it, you can go to Marina. And so, yeah, there's the cosmic spider web. There are physicists in this room who probably understand all about this. So there's something called the dark matter web. And so Mark Nerink and colleagues are sort of using the origami tessellation theory as a sort of an approximation of folding of these dark matter sheets in the universe. And so it sort of provides an intuition model for the 6D folding of dark matter sheets. That's 3 Euclidean dimensions plus 3 velocity dimensions, something like that. And so actually they have gone on and made origami tessellations based on galaxy organization. So I'm from the paper, this is the Council of Giants. That's the sort of our local cluster of galaxies around us, obviously in 2 dimensions, both in origami and as a spider web here. So this is sort of a nice way of visualizing, and who would have thought that, yeah, origami was happening at these megaparsec scales, hundreds of millions of light years scale of origami. So I think, does that mean I win the scale of art? Maybe. Okay, so let's wrap things up. So yeah, so origami is a transformative form of art, and the constraints of modern origami have really driven this technical virtuosity. And some of this work is actually extremely artistic as well. But at least for me, I prefer the simplicity to try and think about what's the spirit of the thing you're trying to represent. And getting to that simplicity is actually, it takes a lot of time and effort, and people really don't understand just how much time and effort goes into that process of simplification. Tilings have been an incredibly rich source of inspiration for origami, and I think what we can do with these traditional origami tessellations is not everything. There's still further classes of origami tessellations that don't actually fall within that class. So there's still plenty to explore, even though we have good theory for this style. And folding is happening across this vast range of scales, from both molecular folding, DNA, protein, RNA, right out to maybe the galactic scale too. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So we have plenty of time for questions. I'll come back to you.
I saw the list of conditions with the regular convex organs. Is that a dichotomy? Is that if you don't have these conditions, it's impossible to fold this? Or is it just these are the conditions that are sufficient with your algorithm?
So there's a whole set of sort of folding rules that are sort of outside of this that would apply to, say, folding the crane, flapping bird, which is sort of having at each vertex local foldability, and then foldability in sort of cycles going around that. So those things are all kind of implicit in this. So these only really apply into this very tight class of origami tessellations, where you are taking a tiling and transforming that through this kind of algorithm of shrinking and twisting. So it really is very tightly bound to that. There are definitely other classes of origami tessellations that you can make, where you can tessellate on the paper that don't fall into this class at all. So you can just make simple pleats, corrugations in the paper in multiple directions, and that would be different from this.
But you mentioned having only convex polygons. Is that an absolute rule? So
yes.
With that example you showed, you had to triangulate the bit to make it.
So you can think about this in terms of spider webs, right? You can't have a spider web that does this. You must have something here to keep it under tension.
Okay. Yeah, so thinking in terms of Paul.
That was lovely. The two, I think, related questions. How do you go about the process of making those fold? If you've got a full pattern,
yes,
you've got to go up in some bits, you've got to go down in other bits, you've got to do finite bits of these that end.
yes.
So the first question is, how does that work?
Yes.
The second is, you said several times you're never going to do that one again.
Yes.
Presumably because it took a long time and many failed attempts. Do you have to throw the paper away once you've made a false attempt?
No, actually there are no failed attempts.
Well, that's one nice positive.
Yes. But there are some unfinished. That's true. Still waiting to be completed, one or two. Is there a piece of paper around? Can I? Okay, so for that question, basically, I have a crease pattern printed onto the paper, and then I want to fold these things, but many of the lines, the lines are just sort of within the paper. So in the end, I end up sort of folding over like this, and then just sort of pinching that crease like so, and opening it out. And then I move around to the next one. Make that crease. Open out. Okay, 4 times 400, turn the paper over, do the creases on the other side that go the other way. Okay, now you can get started with the collapse, and then you're basically doing this going all the way around, and so on. And some of them just collapse very simply, and others don't. And so to do this, I use tracing paper, which is unforgiving in that if you try to if you make a fold the wrong way and you reverse it, the paper will break. So you must not make any mistakes. However, tracing paper is extremely stiff in this axis. I don't think it has any grain. I'm not sure of the manufacturing process, but essentially it's very rigid. So you can put a lot of force across the paper to collapse it before anything bad happens. And so that's essential. There's a guy called Chris Palmer who pioneered using fabric for doing this. So makes rather beautiful sort of fabric material. For me, it's not perfectly accurate. You know,
How do you hold the creases with fabric?
So with the fabric, you sew the centers of the tiles to a substrate. So you sort of shrink them in, and then you can just sort of, by hand, sort of swirl the things round. And it's not perfect. Yeah, so it's an approximation.
That was brilliant talk. Fabulous work, Alex. Really, really good. I've got a question that I want to tie together a few threads from today, and it concerns your work and David Hockney and geometric optics. There's another way. There's all ray tracing is one way of thinking about optics, and there's another way to think about optics, which is from Huygens principles, so the wave fronts coming down. And we've heard that David Hockney has sold his painting for $90 million, I think it was, the swimming pool painting. And you think of the swimming pool as the patterns on swimming pool floors that absolutely blow me away. And you can think of that as a light sheet coming down. So forget the ray tracing, think of light sheet. It comes down, it gets refracted, and then it gets squished flat, folded, and then squished flat on the floor. And in so doing, it speaks the language of René Thom, which is another thread to tie in, and it just speaks all the catastrophes, the folds, the cuffs, the swallowtails, the butterflies, the hyperbolic umbilicus. They're all there on the swimming pool floor. Not so much in the Hockney paintings, but definitely on the swimming pool floors. Now, and they look very, very like, the beautiful patterns on swimming pool floors are starting to look very like some of your tilings and your tessellations. And have you ever thought of doing a swimming pool floor folding and then selling it for lots of money? And doing the sort of discrete version of the Tom's hyperbolic umbilicus and so forth. I've been trying to find an origami person for a long time who's willing to try this and do swimming pool floor patterns that give this discrete version of the Tom catastrophes.
Yeah, so you could, I guess, if you can capture an image of that, then one can turn it into geometry, then you can generate a crease pattern from that.
Yes.
I think the paper will get very wet.
Very clear, very clear.
Sorry, Shabnam, and then you after that.
So it's very much like a cottage industry trying to, make these patterns. Like you get very tired if you're trying to do something this size, which is one of those tessellations.
Yes, you can't manufacture them in.
Well, I was wondering, can you industrialize a process whereby you have little fingers or little bits of spheres that you're saying it wants to collapse into a sphere, and then maybe you have a small localized sphere, and then you can collapse that bit, and then,
Yeah. So it's sort of, can you manufacture these sorts of things? So the kind of things that I'm doing, certainly not from tracing paper, right? I mean, because there's this sort of all-in-one collapse that doesn't happen. It's not a very smooth transformation between the two states. It's rather horrible at times. And, the paper is sort of buckling in uncomfortable ways. However, so there is historically, in France, there's this tradition of the ateliers making pleated fabrics of very high-end sort of fashion. So, at the simplest level, that's, the pleating on a skirt. So these ateliers had ways to manufacture these things. And so what they had was basically two sheets of card, which were sort of tessellations that smoothly deformed, not like these ones. And so they would put the fabric in and then fold them up, and then they'd get sort of flattened. I'm not sure if they were steamed or something, ironed, and then taken out, and then the fabric would be in this folded up thing. And So, you know, more recently designers, Issey Miyake has done some sort of work along these lines, but that tends to be very bespoke, at low volume numbers there.
And you use cloth instead of paper. It's somewhat more.
Yes.
Possibly certain ways, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely speed up manufacture by using, you know, technologies maybe of laser cutting or vinyl cutters and the sorts of tools that exist.
No, she asked the question.
Oh, she asked the question. Can't see any other note.
I was expecting to find some woman names because the qualities it demands are really fine and delicate. So how is it? The Japanese name maybe, or in your group? Is it more men hobby or passion?
Sad men, I think you mentioned in the pub late at night.
Yeah, no, I think there's a reasonable gender balance in sort of, at least in British origami. In Dutch origami, it's very heavily female. So there's quite a large origami sort of home craft movement.
And in Japan, you know, is it more?
So I think it's reasonably, because at kindergarten everyone learns origami. So just everyone can do it. Yeah, maybe it's stereotyping, but I would say on the very technical side, it tends to be the young men who like are trying to beat each other and come up with the most complicated models. But you know, otherwise, I think it's pretty gender neutral.
Andre.
To follow up on the last two questions and your comment, we should employ armies of little children to do this. You know,
To do
You have children?
yours. To do paper folding.
in 18th century, 19th century, of course, I'm saying it tongue-in-cheek, of course.
I just think they may not have the patience or the.
Oh, they have a lot of people. I was just going to give an example. In England and Holland, watches had fusee movements, maybe you've heard about it, and they require tiny little chains, sub-millimeter size of each. And turns out only children can put them together. But on a more serious note, I just want to tell you that we invited Robert Lang and he couldn't come. So, but now but now we know that we can invite both of you next time.
Yeah, it's a shame. Robert, does a very good talk.
I mentioned Helena Beryl. She's a mathematician out of Great Majority who does a lot of origami.
Helena
Beryl.
Helena Beryl, yeah. So.
Yeah, I know.
What kind of things does she do?
Well, I haven't been in touch with her for about 20 years, but she was a big inspiration on the weave tessellations. So,
Okay, I think.
Currently at Warwick, but so I've known her on and off, and she now has exhibitions of origami. So, but I can't tell you details about her work, obviously. But
yeah, so while we're on recommendations, Eric Domain.
I invited him. He never replies to emails.
Yeah, okay. He is difficult. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, very difficult.
Okay.
I'm in the same town.
On that note, let's draw the afternoon session to a close. So could we thank all the speakers?